Community Culture Unveiled, uncovering and discussing the secrets of mental health in oppressed communities. Hosted by a girl for all girls.
Welcome back to Community Culture Unveiled. I am one of the co-hosts, Taquayla Muhammad, and we have introducing my fellow co-hosts, psychotherapist Teresa Teachers, clinical psychologist Dr. Monique Muhammad, and one of our co-hosts, Amelia Muhammad, who's out for the day. If you missed the last show, it was jam-packed with information regarding racial trauma, intervention, and how it affects us and ways it correlates with racial driven trauma. We had on the show for a second time neuropsychologist Christopher Howard. And if you were not familiar with what neuropsychology is or what it is the study of brain and behavior. So he spoke from the male perspective and experience of trauma and how systematic racism magnifies with lack of knowledge. And he also stated that we must bring community back into the fold. We also learned that throughout history, there have been examples of how Black people would gain traction and power, and we would immediately be brought down by the white power structure. And we can't control someone who knows who they are. Very, very powerful. So today, we are going into part two of racial trauma, mental enslavement. So I hope that you enjoy it. I'm going to turn it over to Teresa.
Wonderful. Man, that was a great opening once again. You do such a good job at recapping because I think the recap sets a really good foundation for where we're going so you don't feel lost in moving forward. You understand the linkage in which we're trying to, move you. I do want to start off with something that is thought provoking and a quote that could probably say it better for us to set the tone for mental enslavement. All right. So Carter G. Woodson said, in The Miseducation of the Negro, which many of you should be familiar with. And if you're not, I would say pick it up as you've already started reading. If you can control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his action. When you determine what a man shall think, you do not have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you make a man feel that he is inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status, for he will seek it himself. If you make a man think that he is justly an outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. So we wanted to start off with something very profound that has been written, and we know most of our what we can find are in books. And when we don't read and we don't educate ourselves, and it's called the miseducation of the Negro, because we allow others to educate us, and we don't take charge of our post, which is ourself, to seek knowledge and to understand who we are and why we were created. And therefore, we lean ourselves in to the possibility of being controlled by others who have educated themselves about who we are and who they are and what the next agenda is. So I found all of that to be very, very profound in a sense that we're talking about mental health in our community. And when our mental health is jeopardized, it's normally impeded upon by ignorance, by a lack of knowledge, by a lack of strength, by a lack of understanding. And if we want to build stronger communities and we want to improve our mental health, we first must understand who we are, why we were created, and what our power is, where our power lies, and getting rid of those things that impede upon our ability to function in a healthy way. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to open up the floor so we can jump on into this discussion because I think it's going to take a coloring of its own, and we're just going to go ahead and get in it, girls. Let's do it.
Yes, yes. That I'm still kind of vibrating from the quote that you just read from Carter G. Woodson's book. It really, you talked about how things that undermine our ability to determine or to achieve um, our self determination in this life, and what that quote kind of points to is the mental enslavement that Black people are still under. This is what connects to the racial trauma. Um, the quote that you read kind of harkens to a something that I mentioned in a previous show where we talked about premature cognitive commitment. I don't know if we remember that, but briefly explaining premature cognitive commitment essentially is one example of that. You can put fleas in a jar, and a flea can jump, if it's a short jar, a flea can jump, three, four, 10 times over that. But if you put the lid on the jar, the flea will only jump as high as the jar. It won't continue to hit the top of the jar.
Mhm.
Eventually, it'll just, that will be its range. If you take the lid off the jar, the flea will still continue to only jump just to that level and won't jump out the jar, although it has the ability to do so. I'm saying this to say that that idea that Prodigy Wisham was putting across of that self-limiting way of thinking that has kind of stemmed from enslavement. Black people were in chattel, physical chattel enslavement, and the chains were removed, just like the lid taken off the jar. But there was still a cognitive commitment to being limited, to being less than, to being inferior. And we have really positioned ourselves in many respects. Society is doing its job too, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of structural racism and barriers that are in place, but we also are playing a role in that, where that we have internalized that inferior status and we hold ourselves there. And that's kind of what it was expressing to me.
Hmm. Okay. So,
So, so I guess, if there's if instead of, chains and ropes and whips, there's a mental bondage, that we're under. And a lot of us are not aware that we are submitting, surrendering, owning
yeah,
an inferior status that's been put upon
okay. When I'm thinking about communities, what makes people, when I lived in New York and I worked in the Bronx, I thought what made people stay in a specific block radius, live, do everything, how they could keep individuals in the tenements only dealing with each other in the tenements without it being a cage around it. How is
us.
it that they never left their block, but they didn't
Hmm.
have shackles? How is it that they only network with each other? We're talking about diseases, we're talking about robbery and crime, we're talking about like the recycling of each other in the most harsh ways that you could do to each other. It just reminds me of so many communities that live in shackles
Mm.
and so many individuals that live in fear of moving out of those shackles. I mean, it also makes me kind of like it evokes an emotion within me. I don't know about anybody else, but I work so hard to release fears and release things from my mind that keep me from doing things. And I tell some of my patients, I say, the only difference between you and me, because I had a hard childhood, is that I believed that I could overcome and do whatever I wanted to do. That is the only difference. So that means that the difference between, of course, it involves a little skill and a little talent and a little drive.
Right.
But the point is that I didn't have any fears because I thought I could do whatever I wanted to do because nobody put those sort of shackles on me because there was nobody there to put them on me, right? So that says something, meaning my parents were gone, there was nobody there to raise me, so I didn't have them putting their shackles on me, so I thought it was free game. But imagine all of those individuals who live with parents who put shackles on them, and we don't even realize that sometimes we put shackles on our children that they can't get out of mentally.
That's real.
Mm.
But what about the shackles that society puts on us also? Often those are invisible shackles that we don't recognize, we don't realize. We just are constantly bumping into barriers in life. We're unable to get to what we're trying to get to. And we begin to think that it's because I'm inferior, or it's because I'm incompetent, or I'm not good enough. And you begin to kind of turn in on yourself and think that you're deficient in some kind of way, when really it's because you're walking this world in a black face, when the world only it's for white only. And so I think that's a big piece that often we don't see. Yes, there's some uh, family level stuff that's happening that kind of impacts us and how we think, but there's also the societal, which I think is the bigger impact, honestly, is the societal barriers, the structural racism
Mhm.
that keeps us in this trauma state that we're in.
Yeah. And it's what you're exposed to, I believe, as well, because um, I'm just giving an example. So my grandmother, um, she was in prison. She went to prison for 18 years. So I didn't see my
Wow.
grandmother. I don't remember seeing my grandmother when I was young. I only seen her when she got out of jail. But my grandmother's institutionalized right now. She lived in a little apartment. She doesn't want to leave. She has a cat. She doesn't want to get on the plane. She doesn't want to travel. She literally, like, you're free. And I remember, she would write us and tell us, when I get out, this is things that I want to do, and this is, just all these different things. But when she got out, she just couldn't do anything. And it's like the sky's the limit. But like you mentioned, it's like shackles in your mind. And some of us, we're also born into environments where we don't have, certain things appear normal to us. You know what I mean? You don't have knowledge because there's nothing else sticks out to you. So if you're born in a neighborhood and everybody's
Mm,
fornicating, that's normal to you. If everybody's eating ramen noodles and sitting outside on the porch, that's normal. You won't know that it's not normal until you come out of that environment and go into a different environment. That's when you say, okay, wait
right,
a minute. Is it something wrong with me, or is it something? And then you start to compare the two. And that's when you can change, into that thinking.
Excellent.
right.
Ex excellent. No, go ahead. I got
Yeah.
so many things in my head about so many situations. I even think I was thinking about the entertainment because I was watching the 50 years celebrated of hip hop the other night,
Mm,
music awards, and thinking about how they kinda kept it clean, where it was a lot more old hip hop, um less revealing girls rapping about oral sex and things like that that they rap about now, but more like real, old school. It seems like it was a take back.
yeah.
But how media controls the shackles by who they give record deals with is no coincidence that buffoonery rap get the record deals. It's
Correct.
no coincidence that conscious rap, quote unquote, you don't see many conscious rappers unless they're independent.
Mhm.
But
Right.
Shake That Booty and I Suck a Mean Thing and all these type of, I mean, it's real. Like, why
Right.
is that allowed when we put ourselves, and women talk about respect? We talk about respect. By the way, I can't
Mm,
wait to announce the next show, but we talk about women and respecting themselves. They put themselves in shackles, but they want other people to respect them. They put themselves on
mm,
display like they're being auctioned off like a slave. That is
mm,
that not the slave trade? Like, when you're
right.
naked on stage, is that not that means I'm for the biggest and highest buyer. Is that not another
Right.
form of slavery that I can be sold? If you got some money and
Right.
you got a bag, you can come get it. That's a lyric.
Mhm.
That's like a fly way of saying, "I'm ready for enslavement. I'm ready to do this, and I'm willing to do
Mm, mm,
whatever."
mm.
Remember, we cried about in slavery about us being raped and physically assaulted. We cried about it, but yet now we embrace it. Tell me how that
Mhm.
makes
Right.
sense.
Mm, mm, mm.
I'm just
We
kinda
walk
like,
in contradictions today. We are literally walking contradictions, but going again, it goes back to controlling a man's thinking. Our thinking is so very controlled.
Mm.
Everything what we're doing is what we are. We have been set in motion by an enemy of ours, an oppressor of ours, who wants nothing more than our sheer destruction. and we are literally following the script that we've been given. And we're not thinking beyond it. Whatever was flashed in front of us, whatever is on social media or television or videos as being the thing of the day, we're running right behind it. So if it's being naked, here we go, we're naked. If it's having a behind out of proportion with your body, then we're going to get BBLs. Like whatever it is, it's really sad. But I want to kind of flip it into I think a little bit. This is an example when Sister Kelly, you were talking. This example came up in my mind of how it an example from my own experience that I was falling right into this kind of internalization of white supremacy. It's a small example, again, somewhat benign, but still, it's still impactful. And this, I was at a conference, and Black psychologist conference, and they're very Pan African. They're very African, and so um, one of my colleagues who was doing a presentation was talking about, he wears a lot of African garments and he does it with his clients. Um, and in the hallway, when I saw him, I said, so you dress like, you wear this, what he had on, with your clients. And he was like, yeah. And I said to him, well, I try to be as neutral as possible when I'm, working with my clients. And it's funny, as I said the words, I wish I could just grab the words out of the air, because it was in that moment that I realized that is the oppressor in my mind. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because what makes me think that wearing, regular, quote unquote, button down top and pants is the standard and the norm, and that something that comes from that's more African styled is a not norm or not standard. My point is that I have been taken out of an orientation of my own and replaced it with in a very European or Eurocentric way of thinking. So this is the standard European centered way of dressing. That's standard, that's normal, and everything outside of that is not normal. That's not so. And so I caught myself thinking like that. And that's not huge. It's not, detrimental, I don't think, but it's still the slave master's mind in my mind. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course. I mean, how we think is a direct result of what we've been predisposed to, right? And so we say things unconsciously that we don't realize keeps us enslaved. And that is the most dangerous. When
Yeah.
it's almost like funny enough, when someone's like, when a white person says, I have a black friend, that just sounds so crazy. Or when someone says to me, basically, you're pretty to be a black girl. Oh, are you mixed with
Mm,
something? Oh, I like your hair. Like none of that is flattering, right?
Right.
But these are like unconscious statements people make
yes,
that set the
yes.
precedence. I asked an African guy in Ghana, I said, something about movies. And he said he started naming actors and he named like 10 white actors and then he named one black. And I said, "Why you name all them white?" I was kind of upset. And then
Mhm.
he was like going back and forth. He's like, "Well, I said, like say Denzel Washington. I said Denzel Washington. I said, is that the only black actor? You're telling me you couldn't
Wow.
name 10 black actors first?" I said, let me tell you how it would have went in America. We would have named some black actors, and then we would have said, oh, but I like Robert De Niro. Like we would have done
The opposite.
done the
I
total
think that's kind of
opposite,
true.
and that was when I noticed that colonialism and, how
It's
they were
real.
enslaved in Africa is so different than our slavery because now we're in sort of this different space and they don't have integration there. So
Correct.
what
Yeah.
they're thinking is what their thinking is, and ours because we have access. So that moves us into more like structural racism, where after slavery, we couldn't get no job but to continue being slaves, right?
Absolutely.
And so then when we read your definition, Dr. Monique, you posted structural racism is built into the social structure rooted in discriminatory policies and practices enacted by society as a large. Then we start to believe that all we are maids and farmers or maids and labor people. Quick story is like super quick. I lived in New Orleans for 5 years. I went to college down there. I'm green. I go down there. I'm really California, LA, free liberal girl, whatever. Woo, woo, woo. And I went to work at a hotel, never worked at a hotel, but because I believed I could do whatever I wanted to do, I applied for front desk. I didn't know nothing about down south, black people working at the front desk. I didn't know those practices still exist, still existed. And that man hired me on the spot. They didn't have no black people working at the front desk. And when I went to lunch every day, all the maids were black, which I wasn't used to seeing. They were all sitting over there and they had separated themselves without even knowing me from me. And I thought, I was so traumatized because I come from California. It's very liberal. And I thought, wait, do they think I'm better? Am I like the house nigga? Like
Mhm.
I became the house nigga in real
Wow.
I became the house nigga. They had already mentally put themselves less than because I worked in the house and they worked in
Mm,
the fields. Now you tell me like
mm,
I couldn't even believe what I was experiencing because again, I'm coming from LA, super liberal, super integrated. We don't know nothing about this kind of stuff. It's like culture shock. But but we still perpetuate the jobs. Still
yep,
perpetuate this institutional style or structural style of racism. But the key point I want to say is that that structural racism transcends to being truth in our minds.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
we go back to
Absolutely.
our communities believing and
Yep,
striving for minimalism, right?
that's it.
And
Yep.
our producer gave me a good quote, which we cannot quote our wonderful Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He said, "He who gives you the diameter of your knowledge prescribes the circumference of your
Of
activity."
activity. That's it. Come on, drop the mic.
Drop the mic. He who gives you the diameter of where you can think,
Absolutely.
Yep.
describe,
Starts in
prescribe
school.
the circumference of your activity. He
Yeah.
can dictate your activity because he's already set a perimeter.
Around your thinking.
Ooh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's deep.
It starts with kindergarten. It starts young.
Yep.
you got children.
Yes.
Tell us about all the
Absolutely.
children you have and what those phases look like, and you have to fight against.
Absolutely. I mean, just school. Our children are very intelligent and brilliant, but they'll not hold them back. They'll push them forward, knowing that they can't read, knowing that our children are not educated properly in the school system, and knowing that okay, they get to a certain level, they don't want to be doctors and lawyers and psychologists. They want to be basketball players and football players, and you know
Rappers.
yeah, rappers, and this is the dream that they're selling our children. I put my
Yes.
children now, my children are homeschooled because I already knew you're not going to limit my children. And I had that first experience with my first child. He'll be 18 next month, but I took him to a daycare, it's Child Network or something like that. But all the teachers were white, but that was the closest daycare
Mm.
to my home. So I said, I'm gonna let him go ahead and go. All on the wall is just everybody but what my son. Nothing of himself. Nothing of himself. So my thing is, what can he grow up to be? And that's normal. That was normal for the environment. That's normal for the society. And we got to get out of that. We have to be able to pour into our children, let them know you can be something other than what someone else wants you to be. Showing them other beautiful doctors and lawyers and psychologists and just we have to show them that what they can do. I used to take my children even
Yeah.
around different neighborhoods. Like we're not living we don't have to live in poverty because it's forced upon us. Because they tell us this is what you can do, especially me being a mother. You have a certain amount of children, you go into the hood or the projects, most of the women have two, three, four, five, six children living in an apartment because it's rent free or low income. And that's all you can afford. But they don't show us certain things you can do. You can buy a home. Show us how to buy a home with your income. So with lack of knowledge, then we're basically stuck in those mental enslavements and we don't even know how to get out of it.
Therefore, our
Mm.
communities stay oppressed, as we talk about all the time. And
Absolutely.
being oppressed is a micro trauma, and
Absolutely.
it creates long-term effects on how we function and how we believe and what we strive for in the longevity. And you know, our ceiling is so low. And that's why that quote is so significant, that controlling our mind controls basically our activities of how much we can do. And we're reminded when we go out of that circumference. Oh, we're reminded when we go, especially in places like here. I live in Chicago, voted one of the most segregated cities in America. I couldn't believe it. When you go in other neighborhoods, they let you know they don't want you there. It's not even a hide or a secret. In California, you gotta be real crafty about how you impose, like, stuff because it's gonna be 10 white people that's gonna come to your aid, where here, you on your own. You on your own. So,
Absolutely.
Mm,
it's such a difference here between here and living in California. It was a culture shock to me, and that's what makes me more passionate about it. Quickly, I had a client the other day, a little girl, she was only 13. She's complaining about her history teacher. She got a D in the class. She's like, I don't like that teacher. I don't like that teacher. She just give too much stuff. And then she be teaching, she be changing the history. She be trying to
Mhm.
tell us that what's in the history books is lies. And she be trying to tell us about my Black history and who did what and who and about indigenous people. And why do I care anything about my African people? I just can't teach what's in the book. I mean, she went on a rant. And I was sitting there, I really didn't have a full answer. I had no, what do I need to know about? I don't care about Black people. I don't care about indigenous. Just teach what they gave you to teach.
mm.
I was like 13 years old. She said, it's too difficult to be learning about the truth. I just teach me what's in the book so I could pass
It starts very young. It starts
Mm.
very young.
Where was
But
she
are
You
they
know,
at?
teaching? Yeah, are they
Huh?
teaching?
hmm?
I said, are they teaching? Because I remember when I was in school, they weren't teaching anything about us. So I felt the same way because they were
Well,
teaching us about
it sounds like
Islanders and Columbus and all these different
No,
things that I
she
said,
wanted to learn about Columbus. She didn't want to learn
right. It's
history.
"Oh, okay. Yeah.
She didn't want to.
the teacher was trying to mix in some Black
Okay, I
history. It sounds like,
got okay.
and she was like, "No, let me just tell me about my slave
So
Yeah.
masters."
she give me all these assignments that I could go research stuff that's not in the book. Why she can't just teach what's in the book? I don't need to know about Black people and what's the history. She want to teach about the history of Black. I mean, the way she was saying it, I was like, oh my God, she's gonna lead our city, our community one day. And she's like, why do I care about our history? Why does it even matter? And I was like, "What?" And then she's like, "Well, my mom is half Black." I said, "What do you mean she's half Black?" "She's from Belize." I could have fell out my chair. She's like, I'm half Black." I was like, "'Cause your mama from Belize, you half Black?" I was like, "Do you know the history of Belize?" You know what I'm saying? Like, you need to be learning some history. You need your teacher to be teach.
But see, that's the thing. This society makes it so not palatable to anything Black is just associated with something negative, right? It's so easier for us to look at the founding fathers and all these the politicians and these people as these big important people, and we'll read about them all day and what they've said and what they've done. But then you hold up, some of our history and many of our young people. I don't think that's as uncommon as what one might think. You reminded me, and then this example kind of reminds me again when you were talking about New Orleans. There's a program that I'm involved with where we deal with trauma and being trauma informed, but we facilitate forums with police and community members. And we've been doing this in the city of Newark for some years now. And we get into some really gritty conversations. We talk about race and we're like straight up about it. And no one has I mean, some people get a little edgy, but for the most part, those are the conversations we have here. Well, our program expanded to Baton Rouge in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Mhm.
And it was a whole different ball game. I couldn't believe it. I had, we had police in the room. And meanwhile, they have some history there with police brutality and so forth. On the Sterling happened there, but nonetheless, there was a forum that I was facilitating, and the Black people in the room were so defensive of white people. They were so, anything that we said that recognizes the idea of white supremacy, was like, no, that's not true. We can't blame white people. We can't hold them responsible for what happened before. That was a long time ago. Black people are lazy. We wait for white people to do what we do for them, what we could do for ourselves, which is something the minister has said. But it's a whole nother context when he has said it. It was just, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. And these are adults, right? But it starts with that young sister that you were dealing with. It
Absolutely.
starts there. And we grow up hating everything Black, looking disparagingly at everything Black. That is a trauma, folks. That's the thing that I don't think we understand. That is trauma.
It is.
And so it is really important for us to recognize and see that we're not going to see it in ourselves. That's something that's going to have to be brought to our attention through knowledge of self, which is what that teacher was trying to do. Give that young sister a knowledge of
She was
herself.
like, "No, no, thank you." She was like, "No, no, thank you." I
Mhm.
mean, I got really blessed.
I want to be a slave.
I wanna be a slave. My dad mother is indigenous or she's whatever, Mexican. I don't wanna say whatever, I don't mean it like that, but she's from
Mhm.
Mérida in Yucatan, Mexico. Her name was Teresa as well, and she came to the country, and during that time, it wasn't cool to be Mexican. So she started telling him, I guess they started talking about being indigenous and settling on the indigenous part, which I don't know how that made it even better, but I guess it did. But my dad never raised us to be Mexican or from that side of any way. He said, "You are original." So the point I'm making is that because my dad always told me I was original, he just used the word original. You are original. You are original.
Mm.
You are original. You are this. And if my dad didn't give me nothing else, he gave me the truth,
That.
freedom, justice, and equality, and he kept instilling that we were original. And even though I'm the darkest and they're about as white and my dad's about as white as snow, I never had a complex because my dad always said that I was the best because I was more
Mm.
original. Like he always made a point to distinguish me as being original. And as a point, you would think I would grow up kind of insecure because my sister hair is all the way to her butt, or because this well, everybody's lighter, but I didn't. So a point I'm making is that it starts in the home. What are you
Mhm.
teaching your children? What are we teaching our community of children? So when I'm walking around and I see beautiful chocolate children, I could be in a nail shop and I'll be in the hood nail shop. I'll turn to the girl, I'll be like, your daughter is so pretty. Look at her skin. It's chocolate. It's like
Mhm.
creamy. I tell the little girl, you are so beautiful. But you can tell people don't tell her that because
Yes.
they don't know how to respond. Like, I'm like, "You are so pretty. You are so chocolate. Can I have your skin?" And so it
Mhm.
starts I do. I tell them, "Can I have your skin? You so beautiful." Like, what are
Mhm.
we doing in our community?
They need to hear that.
We
We
need
need
to.
to hear that.
I grew up
Like,
like that too. My sister's like super duper light skin with the long hair and all that. And we grew up like our family literally would go and look at us and say, she's prettier. Like, period. Literally, yes. And
Ouch.
that's what I grew up around. And so
Yeah.
it wasn't.
Did you grow up in the South?
I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. So
that's the
that's where I
same.
grew up. But it was still,
Right. Everything after Jersey is South. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's compared to Georgia, it's north to me. It's
Yeah.
totally different. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Right.
still horrible to be around that because I felt like I did grow up with insecurities growing up about, being
Mhm.
brown, because that was the thing.
Yeah.
And I grew up in that era
Yeah.
where it was light skin versus dark skin. That was a real thing during my time in high school, in the school. And so, like my sister's really starting to understand it now, but she even took the complex and ran with it because she knew that, oh, I am very pretty because they've told me this all my life. So she had a whole different attitude
Mm.
about herself. She flocked toward the side of the white side for it because she knew you know what she can get or how that I mean that's a real thing. So we do need to hear that, and our children need to hear that. And that's one of the things I
Right.
do too. Teresa is, when I see children, any complexion, but definitely brown skinned children, I tell them that they're beautiful because we don't hear it as much. The children don't hear it.
No, we don't. And that is a part of I deal with a lot of clients who don't believe they're pretty, who struggle
Yeah.
with self-esteem, men who struggle with low self-esteem for whatever reason, and poverty keeps us enslaved. Poverty keeps us enslaved, but
Yeah.
how do we end up in being stuck in poverty is through mental enslavement because we have too much damn talent in our neighborhoods and in our communities to be broke. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
when we have the talent and someone decides they wanna discover it, like Christopher Columbus, like, it's a discovery that they made when it already been on display in the community already, it just ain't never went nowhere. Then it's like they limit, again, the quote, they limit our circumference of how we can operate what we make, and they put a value on us once again and a cap on us. So when a football player like Lamar Jackson asks for the millions and the billions, and the commentators get all upset and he asking for a lot of money, he renegotiating his contract. I said, no, he's renegotiating his circumference. I can use that. He's renegotiating how much he's worth and he's putting his own number on it versus you telling him what number in comparison to what they make off of us,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
they make off of us. Like, come
Yeah.
on, come
Right.
on.
But then when
So
we
we
start
got to
doing that, they come for us too. Once we start, figuring it out, then now they want to come for us. Now they come with the false
Yeah.
charges and different things because we want to stand up. So we have to be willing to go through that fire as well.
Yeah. You always have to stay with the party line, right? Stay with, what you're being told. As soon as you step a little bit to the left, they're like, no, they're coming after you.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah.
the I'm sorry, I'm looking up this movie because it was with Matthew McConaughey, where Matthew McConaughey had a scene in it, Jones County in Mississippi. It's a movie. It's a true story based on a true story. Um, he told the poor military people he was watching the poor white people die to fight the Civil War, which they always say the Civil War instead of saying it's a war to determine slavery, right? And
Right.
so he was like, "We don't own no slaves. We poor. Well, do you own a slave?" He was like talking to all of the white poor people that were fighting and dying to secure rich people's slavery. And he's like, when was the last time you bought a slave? Do you own a slave? So why are we out here fighting a war to keep slavery when we don't even own slaves for
Right.
rich white people? So they led a charge in Mississippi against the white rich people who wanted to keep slavery. And so I say that because when we buck the mental and institutional and structural slavery, we find ourselves in trouble because how dare us buck that? How dare us come against that is what you said, Sister Tequila, about or Monique, about coming for us when we step outside of those boundaries. Okay. So we're gonna move this along just a little bit because I think we could go all night with sort of random acts of mental slavery. I think we all kind of know that the time is now to change our thinking, judging by all the social media posts of people trying to raise awareness on different topics. Like
Right.
there's about 10 million Black men on there talking about male female relationships, which I find it to be interesting that this whole movement about Black women and loving Black women have risen. I don't know if you are, every time I think there's a new pop up
Oh,
about somebody talking about treating Black women, and some people find it like excessive, but I'm like, but who cries for us? And so I get a kick out of
Right.
watching it, right? Because we,
I'm noticing that trend too, and I'm just curious as to what is sparking that. I don't know if that's something that's being generated or that's an interesting trend. I'm very curious about it.
well, I'm glad for the trend because there's no, I'm tired of
Yeah.
advocating for ourselves, and there is
absolutely.
nobody else better to advocate for us than the Black man because it just says something different. But it also, when they don't love us, that's enslaving to our soul.
Yes, that is. Yeah.
It's enslaving to our soul when we think our men, that in our DNA, we were raped multiple times to protect them. They don't tell that story about how we were raped to protect them, how we had to carry the family and to see them not love us. That pain still runs in our vein. And it mentally enslaves us to make us believe that we're not good enough, which is sort of a segue to our next show. I don't want to give too much away, but I want to lay the foundation for it because we're going to introduce it in just a second. I just want to kind of know this. Does anyone else have any personal testimonies about keeping themselves enslaved mentally and how it got the best of us until and when we broke free of it, how things just sort of opened up and changed?
Well, you know, I can't exactly say that I've broken free. I'm going to leave space to, I guess, just leave space to, admit or that there might be stuff that hasn't come up for me yet, that I haven't. I'd like to think that I'm somewhat free of this slave master's mindset in my own thinking, but I can certainly say, as you were talking about your dad, I was thinking about my father, who was he was, pro black, like, really dashiki wearing and the whole bit. And when my sister and I were young, um, we were very focused on, white is right. I would have to say that's kind of how, that's what society was telling me. And in my home, I wasn't getting anything very, very different. My dad was not in the home, but he was very much in my life. But um, I'm going to get, when I was young, I remember, and I didn't understand it at the time, but I remember my grandmother saying to me, telling me I should pinch my nose, that I should squeeze my nose. And I didn't understand what she meant by that and why. It was not until I was an adult that I realized, oh, I got a black nose. And my family is very, very, very light. And I believe that them being light and having kind of hair the way their hair is was privileging for them. And so I was a little on the other side. And so I think I grew up with this kind of a white mindset. But my dad was always very pro black, speaking to me and my sister and trying to encourage us to love ourselves and da da da. But it was like want, want, want at the time. But it wasn't until I went to college and I majored in Africana studies and began to see what was done to me by another hand that I began to recognize the dots and connect the dots. So that was what was helpful for me, is being able to see the hand that created the damage.
That's good. So gaining awareness and mental fortitude
Yeah.
to push through. And they're all just mental shackles, right? We got these mental shackles that sit on us all the time. And I tell my clients, negotiate with yourself.
Mm,
Negotiate your way out of those shackles because
mhm.
negotiation leads to rational thinking, hopefully, because we're
Yeah.
weighing all the real time possibilities, which takes you out of another thinking when you are looking at what's in front of you and negotiating what's in front of you. It stops you from pulling from another place, which is called emotional enslavement, which is another form of
Mm,
mental slavery. It says when you are a slave to your emotions, you live in the here, in the now, see issues through the lens of yourself, are not rational, and are generally not pleasant to be around. And you're pulling from a place uh, etched far back of
yeah.
information. And
That's what we see in a lot of our communities. Like, it's really just about now. And I'm not caring about you. If it advantages me, I don't care if it disadvantages you. So I'll take something from you or destroy something that belongs to you. That emotion, that's deep. That's really deep.
it's why
So
we killing and why we dying in our communities because we have an emotional enslavement. And it's like this whole thing, when somebody say something to you or do something to you wrong, you have this reactive mind that enslaves you and makes you act impulsive. And that is a form of mental slavery when you don't have control of your thinking, when you don't have control of your actions, when you don't
Exactly.
have control of yourself in general. That is an enslavement. And I've seen people struggle with how to stop themselves from having impulsive and erratic and irrational thoughts and behaviors. And we see it they become delusional, and
Mhm.
when you live in extreme trauma and poverty and trauma, you start to think delusional. You start to have delusional thoughts because you're trying to get yourself out of a world of conflict.
Like
And you
insanity.
Yes, and you start telling yourself stuff that's not real because it
Mhm.
hurts so bad to live in the present of what's really happening. You're telling yourself you're a basketball player. You're telling yourself you're a rapper. So you used to have dudes walking around the neighborhood like, yeah, because I be doing my this and you be like, no, you don't. Like sometimes you looking at them like, are they serious? They believe in this grandioseness that they're doing and they have no money. They have no place to live, but yet they believe all these things is because they left the trauma and moved into some like other world that they put themselves in, which keeps them from living in reality and changing their circumstance. So I'm sorry, I just had to say that because that just kind of got me. I'm sorry to call. I knew you was about to go ahead and give your testimony or your point. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh no, you good. You summed it up and everything. So um I don't really have a point. You kind of just took it from there.
I took your point. Well, let's go ahead and move in because we got a little something for the audience, right, Sister Jaco, that we want them to sort of
Yeah.
engage in and do. And hopefully, my producer is ready and queued up to give it to the audience. There we go.
And let us know. These are 8 phrases that changed my life for the better. And I know one of these have to apply. Okay, number 1, you aren't stuck. You are just afraid of change. Number 2,
Mm.
you don't have
Mm.
to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. Number 3, nothing changes if nothing changes. That's a good one. Number 4, don't just exist,
Profound.
live. Number 5, love didn't hurt you. Someone who doesn't know how to love hurts you. That's a good one. I might have to read that one more time.
Mm.
Number 5, love didn't hurt you.
Read it again.
Someone who doesn't know how to love hurts you. Beautiful. Number
Mm.
6, your perspective can be your power or your prison. Number 7, life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. And last, number 8, your life is as good as your mindset. Beautiful affirmation.
Yes.
Be reading these every day if you
Yes.
can. Change the thought.
Does
Be-
anyone stand up? I was working with this with my client today, and I made her read. We read off each one, and I know her life very well, so I made her put like a mental sticky note on each one, and she's doing an assignment where she's drawing lines to behaviors that match this. She's a hoarder, and she's number 3 applied to that. It was like nothing changes if nothing changes. I've been trying to get her to stop hoarding and to clean up, but she can't get past number 1. She's stuck.
Mm,
She's
Mm.
afraid of the change of what
Mm.
getting rid of the stuff may mean, that she then has to deal with, number 5. Love didn't hurt you. Someone who doesn't know how to love, which was her dad, hurt you. So she put her trust into hoarding.
mm,
And she said
mm,
inanimate objects won't hurt her.
mm,
So that's sort of the form of hoarding. A lot of hoarding comes from depression and fear, and a lot of fear of loss or not having or trauma or misusing and things like that. So this is our community. Imagine a lot of people, this applies all 8.
mm.
Mm.
I like
If you
number
do this,
6.
what's number 6? Let me check it.
That's what jumps out to me too. I was gonna say, go ahead, Sister
Your
Cole.
perspective can be your power or your prison. It's all about perspective. It's how you look and view things,
Yeah.
just life in general. And you said it to rest of like your thought. If you didn't believe that you could, have something different or go for something different, you would have been in that same position. And that's how a lot of us are. I left Cleveland and I see our family members. A lot of them are in the same condition because they don't know that other things exist. They haven't even left the state or the city of Cleveland. So
Yeah.
it's all about perspective. And when you live in a different mindset, just life is just different for you. So That one stood out to me.
Right.
That perspective is no joke. It's a prison.
That's
For a
right.
lot of us, it's a terrible perspective. My
Yes.
cousin down in Texas, she's been so hurt by men. She tell her daughter, "F them NIGGASs. Who cares?" Like her perspective is so broken
Mhm.
on men that it
Mm.
keeps her from having love. So it keeps her in an actual prison because all that says to me is that I had lost trust and I'm not gonna try again, and I want everybody to know they shouldn't try, and that's
Right.
kinda how what we do in our community. We sort of kill people's dreams because we have pain, but we also fear that they may actually be successful, and then
Mm.
we'll
Right.
have to reexamine our perspective. So we're hoping that more people are less perspective so we can actually stay where we at. Ain't that crazy?
That's
Mm.
Kinda
crazy, but
confirm
That,
our decline.
yes, that's
yeah.
unique. Which one stood out to you? You said number 6?
Yeah, number six jumped out to me also. Number six and number seven, but the perspective thing, it just reminds me of how, in my working with clients, just getting them to make that shift in their perspective sometimes can be the game changer.
Mm.
Nothing else changes in their life, right? Their life is still exactly the same, but how they perceive what's going on in their life, when that
Mm.
shifts, everything shifts. And
Absolutely.
it's very powerful when that happens. But number seven jumped out to me also. Life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful.
Mm.
And that jumps out to me because I do have a lot of respect personally. And I find this does kind of come into my work with folks that about contentment. I think contentment is sorely underrated.
Mm.
That we often are trying to reach for, the stars, and we want everything to be perfect, and we want to be happy all the time, and we overlook and completely underestimate and underappreciate being content in life, things being okay,
Mm.
right? They don't have to be, you don't have to have the longest hair or the thickest eyelashes or the most money or the biggest house, or if you're fed, you have shelter, comfortable, contentment, contentment. And I really think that's just something that's sorely underrated. And but sometimes in my work, when I help people to begin to recognize areas in their lives that are really okay, you're pushing for something, and it's not that it's not. It's okay to push for something. I'm not saying that it's not, but don't do that at the sacrifice of all of those things that are just okay in your life.
Yes. That's wonderful. I definitely need to hear that.
I need to say it to myself sometimes also.
Yes.
These are really good interventions. I think if you have them up, you can always sort of look at your behaviors and see if they're matching in this or not. And also still using what we said before, which is worst case scenario to overcome. Number one, what's worst that can happen? Oh, if I move to Texas, okay, you just move back home with your family. I mean, but it's worth
Right.
trying, and I think that the intervention is to educate yourself, but also believe that you can do anything. It's like, how do you achieve that? When clients say, "How do you achieve that you can believe that you can do anything?" I mean, it's kind of a circle, right? I think it all just goes back to understanding who you are. And
Mm.
breaking the bonds of slavery means discovering who you are. Because if you knew you had $10 million in the closet in your home, and the door was locked, but you knew it was $10 million in that closet that was in your house, would you break down that door to get that $10 million? Right? So that's
Absolutely.
that
I
is breaking the
penny bank
chains.
for
Huh?
I said I'd break my penny bank for 1,000 if I needed it.
Right. How you turn that water jug upside down. He was like, "Man, I got $500 out that water
Yeah.
jug." Know what I mean? So that's how
Mhm.
we have to be about our knowledge and discovering who we are and what we were our role. Is our role to be ghetto and in our community oppressed and downtrodden and poor and is that what we were made for? I think not. How can
Absolutely
people
not.
with so much talent be just made to be living in the projects, accepting what we've accepted, that means that we have to change our thinking and we have to grow and we have to get
Yeah.
mental health treatment and we have to break these barriers and these stigmas around mental health treatment and get help and live in the reality. Um, Dr. Monica or Tequila, do you guys have any other interventions that we could throw out there or affirmations or things that would be helpful tips for our audience?
No, I think my mind goes back to knowledge of self as we're talking about racial trauma and kind of healing the racial trauma. Knowledge of self is kind of the go-to for me. So yeah. Mm,
Absolutely.
I don't
And
know
for
if you
me,
had
like
anything.
you said, just changing your mindset. I found just listening to motivational, inspirational, and affirmations like on YouTube. Get rid of things that have negative inputs and negative energy. And once you start to change your mindset, like you said, in your perspective, life changes. So it's all in that first step. So the first step, just listen to something different than what you normally would listen to throughout the day and watch how it affects your life.
Do
Yeah,
something
yeah.
different today. That's the remedy. Do something you've never done before today. That is a straight intervention. If you usually go this way, go that way. And you'll see how your energy will shift once you make a turn on a different street. Real talk. So we're gonna move on.
And I also, oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I'm sorry. And what just came to mind also is that what Sister Paula said made me think about the spiritual aspect, kind of really feeding our spiritual side is also can help to kind of break those chains when we really begin to connect with ourselves, our true selves. It can also be very empowering. So,
Absolutely. So now we're gonna move into. I think we down a girl fall girls, and we're gonna make this work out because this topic is so serious. We couldn't delay the second part of this just to kind of give it some more context because we're gonna be playing into the next show. But before we announce the next show, we're gonna take a brief moment, and then we're gonna come back with one or two questions that were sent in about today's show, Mental Enslavement, Racial Trauma Part 2. So we'll be right back. Thank you.
thank you.
The show was right on time, phenomenal. Thank you all those who tuned in. We appreciate you all. Fantastic studio audience. Everyone, we do have two questions that we wanted to pose today. And we're going to go ahead and read the first question from our audience. That question is: how do we distinguish your personal responsibility to change your reality while still holding others accountable?
Read that again.
How
Yeah.
do we distinguish your personal responsibility to change your reality while still holding others accountable?
Hmm. I'm having
How
a
do,
visual. So
how do
I'm
you
like,
change your personal responsibility while still holding others accountable for your reality?
So I feel like it's asking about making a distinguishing between what is mine and what is someone else's,
Yeah.
perhaps that, so going back to what I was saying, what happened for me, what really shifted my thinking was when I was able to see the hand of an enemy in my,
Mm,
identity development.
mm,
Um, and so some of that is mine though, right? Because of my lack of knowledge of who I am and who I was, I just ate what I saw. So if the standard of beauty was, you know, thin and frail and blonde and blue-eyed, then that's I wish I was like that. Like I would just take it in versus, vetting what comes in. There was a reminds me of a quote from Pierre Bourdieu. He's a sociologist, and he said it goes without saying because it came without saying. Now I do try to vet what comes in my mind. I can't vet everything. None of us do. There's so much happening on the subconscious level, right? So we don't get everything. but I do try to be very discriminating about what I let into my conscious mind.
Mhm.
Because again, a lot of the things happened or I enacted what I was ingesting, right? Mentally ingesting. Um, so it went without saying because it came without saying. But yeah.
Yeah. So what
So that's what I think the question is getting to.
I'm thinking
Mm,
you're saying, like, someone did something to you, but you can't hold on to that. You have to take responsibility to change and heal. Our
mhm,
Mm,
responsibility is that you have to take charge of yourself. Someone did it, you have to change it, but then what, right? We have to work towards first ourselves and then change within our community, change within our family, and then holding people accountable by not allowing things to be the status quo. I'm sort of thinking that's where the question was going, right? And how do you sort to change little by little? But of course, we know we're taught to first look at self and change and be accountable for where we're at and try to acknowledge what it is that's holding us back and what it is that has been done to us, and then sort of fighting against those powers through whatever means necessary, through separation, through healing, through community development and other, government and things like that. Whatever your approach through spirituality and so forth.
mm, mm.
and even on a
Wonderful, wonderful.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Mhm, go ahead.
And I was thinking too, even on a personal level, if someone has done something, right, an individual level, someone did something to you, um, sometimes, there's a point at which, holding people accountable for what has happened is important. But sometimes, and many people who I work with, this situation, holding on to the resentment and the grudge of what has happened to you becomes self-damaging, right? And so at some point, it's important to release that, to let that go, and then for you to hold yourself together, for you to kind of, begin to work on healing yourself, and stop you kind of pointing to the other person. And I think it's important to realize that holding those resentments do hold you into the position of a victim,
I was
Mm,
just
right?
waiting on the victim to come up.
Okay.
Go ahead. I was like, and I was about to say it. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. You can't, as long as you're blaming somebody for doing something to you, you're always the victim. When you release that, you will also release your victimhood.
yep,
Isn't that
yep.
how our community
Power.
exists?
Yeah,
Isn't that how
absolutely.
our
In a lot of
we
ways.
all are victims? Everybody's blaming everybody. It also leads to a lack of accountability because
Mhm,
let's be real. I want to validate the point of victimization. It's
Mhm.
in our DNA that we have been unjustly treated and that we have been damaged. So there is a group of people that is responsible for doing things unjust to us, and we were victims.
Yeah.
However, it's created an attitude which we lack accountability now because we don't want to be accountable for nothing because I think subconsciously we want somebody to pay for what has been done to us. So whenever you're talking to us, especially those who lack self-knowledge, you say point out a wrong and they become defensive and they blame everybody, never to take accountability for a
mhm,
behavior, because I
Right.
think through victim by being a victim for so long, you sort of start to mentally enslave yourself with being the victim. So
mhm,
nothing is rational. You're the victim for everything. How do you
Right.
change if you're blaming somebody else for your condition? Not that they're not to blame, but we can't live there forever because now we're shackling ourselves to the victim, and we also made ourselves the actual slave in which we're like a movie.
Yeah.
People watching us, we a victim. We over here in the projects. We over in the hood. See what they doing us. See what they doing us. We not accountable. Look at us. We over here. Like, how do we get out of that? You know what I mean?
correct.
Yeah.
And break those
That's
chains. And that's man, it's so deep. You can go into part three, but we're not gonna do that. But that just
Yeah,
out enough.
that's
We gotta
enough.
move on to
Right.
the next question. Sorry,
yeah, we
sorry, sorry.
have one more question. One more question. Wonderful though. This is an awesome, awesome show. That last question is: how do you respond to people who say that slavery is over? Get over it. What does getting over it mean?
Mm.
Can I? I don't want to jump in first. Um,
What does getting over it mean?
when I have a very visceral reaction to that. Um, Honestly, I do. I think when people say that, the get over it means I want to stay in my state of denial. I don't want to acknowledge. I don't want to think about that. I want to distance myself from from that as much as possible. I just want to act like it didn't even happen. I feel when I hear people say that, that's what it sounds like to me. I can't specify. Different people might say that and mean different things, but that's how it has hit my ears. And but the thing is, my response to that just helping people to recognize, yes, that in chattel enslavement is over, but we just had a whole show and really could have 3 4 more hours in talking about all of the ways in which mental enslavement is alive and well, and that is an outgrowth of the chattel enslavement and the ideology of white supremacy that is very palpable in our society. And so get over what the damage is still being done. And so yeah, that's
I'm still getting beat on, but you want me to get over it. I'm still being killed. I'm still being drugged down the street in Mississippi in the back of a truck,
yep,
and they found me hanging. There's still nooses, there's still Confederate flags, but get over it.
get over it.
Even though you're experiencing racism every day, you need to get over it. It's
Get
like,
over it.
what you not allowing me to get over it because you're reminding me of it. We're learning to live with it because we almost
Yeah,
feel like it will never
right,
change. But we all know that the latter shall
right.
be first. But change will come.
Hey,
Change will come.
say that.
Change
Change will
will
come.
come.
The question is, will you have committed to enough self-improvement to be
Mm,
ready for when it's time for
right,
you to take over? Many of us strive to be in positions that we don't qualify ourselves for because we feel entitled because of the injustice. But don't be
right,
found caught slipping and ask
right,
for
right,
something that you ain't ready
right,
for,
right,
and
right.
we all been there. We so eager to be on top because we've been on bottom so long. And when we get on
Mm-hmm.
top, we make a mess of it because we don't realize that we have to qualify ourselves for positions awaiting us. And when we don't qualify
That's right.
ourselves for positions awaiting us, we find ourselves in another mental slavery of disappointment and low self-esteem and all kind of other delusional things that didn't happen, and depression because you feel like you failed. So look at the cycle. So everything still
Right.
stems back to self-improvement. If you already ready, these little ghetto sayings is real. You ain't got to get ready if you stay
Yes,
ready.
yes.
Stay ready.
And with that being said, we are going to qualify
Well,
ourselves for positions awaiting us. So our next show
right.
is about to be
Well,
amazing.
can I just say one more thing
Yeah.
because I'm listening to myself and I'll be real brief. I don't want to convey the idea that we're off the hook because as I'm talking from a frame of recognizing the white supremacy historically and present, that doesn't let us off the hook for our own upliftment. I just want to be really clear about that point that we are responsible,
Yes.
but we just can't sit around and wait for them to do it for us or expect them to, ease up the rope that's around our neck. And so I just wanted to make that point because I feel like sometimes when we talk about that stuff, we talk about it in a way, or people take it such that we're kind of blaming it on them and as though, oh, we're victims and that's it. So I just wanted to make that point.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
Absolutely.
Sequella.
Oh, that
Let's
was
see. You
wonderful.
were right.
Wonderful. The show is amazing. I am about to go back and rewatch it. Great. All right. And so, again, thank you. Before we end, again, the next show is drum roll original woman and their mental health. So this is going to be phenomenal because we need to talk about it. We need to get it out in the community. And if you have not yet already subscribe, share, like, send it to your friends, send it to your family members, anyone you know that may be suffering from mental health. Make sure that they have this information. It's absolutely necessary. check it out. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Community Culture Unveiled. Okay, share it on your Facebook, share it on your Instagram, put it on TikTok. Okay. So again,
Yeah.
thank you to the co-host on the show, and again, thank you to you all. Wonderful,
Thanks
wonderful.
to our
Thank you.
producers and thanks to you, Tequila, for hosting a wonderful show. Have a good one, everyone.
Indeed.
Peace.
Good night.
Peace and blessings.
Brothers, anybody, family members, if you know anyone that needs this show and it's necessary, tell them to tune in.
Community Culture Unveiled, uncovering and discussing the secrets of mental health in oppressed communities.